The Honourable Member for Beaches, East York.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Very pleased to stand in the House this afternoon in support of the motion on this great opposition day from my colleague, the MP for Terrebonne-Blainville. It's a day in the House, Mr. Speaker, to be talking about privacy issues. This morning I had the privilege of speaking to and in support of Bill C-567, an act to amend the Access to Information Act put forward by my colleague from Winnipeg Centre. And this morning's bill and this afternoon's motion complement each other very well, Mr. Speaker. Together, they demonstrate to Canadians our NDP desire that it be the citizens of this country, not the government of this country, that be able to conduct their lives with reasonable expectations of privacy, and that it is the government of this country, not its citizens, that has the obligation to operate in a manner that is transparent, open, and accountable. If there is a simple conclusion to draw from the sum of the whole day, Mr. Speaker, it is that this Conservative government has it backwards, upside down, and twisted all around. They stand in support of government privacy, of, in fact, the necessity of the government to operate free from the scrutiny of the citizenry of Canada and those they elect to hold this government accountable. How they ask, in response to C-567, can they operate at once openly and honestly? If we are to tell the truth, it must be behind the curtain, they argue, in the dark, outside of earshot, away from the gaze of the public and opposition members of this place. On the other hand, Mr. Speaker, they demonstrate no mere disregard for the privacy rights of Canadian citizens. They demonstrate an appetite, a voracious, seemingly insatiable appetite, Mr. Speaker, for the private information of Canadians. Much is made, Mr. Speaker, of the fact that we live in new and different times with new forms of information and new means of accessing that information. There is truth, of course, to this, undeniably. I think all of us in this case are alive to the ease with which information that we consider private is accessible to those who want to put some effort, and not much is required, Mr. Speaker, into accessing it. Our expectations of privacy are diminished as a result simply because we know the ease with which we are vulnerable. And so we see the narrative here being one of the need to modernize our laws to take these new circumstances into account. But, Mr. Speaker, that does not account for the conduct of this government. The problem before us is not simply one of a government that hasn't come up to speed, that has failed to respond in a timely way to these new circumstances, that has left exposed loopholes in the formulation of laws of this country. That, Mr. Speaker, is to paint a picture of an incompetent or slow but certainly benign government. No, Mr. Speaker, this government is anything but benign. Confronted with a loophole to access the private information of Canadians, a benign government may simply fail to close that loophole. This government leapt through that loophole, Mr. Speaker, fully, completely, headfirst, with great enthusiasm, with an obvious lust for what it would find on the other side. What we have before us, Mr. Speaker, is evidence of this lust. Very recently, the Privacy Commissioner of Canada, Chantal Bernier, revealed that Canadian telecom companies disclosed massive volumes of information to government agencies, including Royal Canadian Mounted Police, the Canadian Security Intelligence Service, Canadian Border Services Agency, as well as provincial and municipal authorities. 1.2 million times. That's the number of times telecom companies disclosed personal data to the Canadian government in a single year. We, of course, Mr. Speaker, concede that a balance is to be found between privacy rights and public security and other concerns, including immediate danger to life. But this must be, and this can be nothing other than, an indiscriminate fishing expedition of monumental proportions that the Privacy Commissioner has revealed to us recently. These volumes equate to information requests with respect to 1 in every 34 or so Canadians. The vast majority of these requests, Mr. Speaker, are made without a warrant. These volumes equate to a request for personal data coming from the federal government to a telecom company once every 27 seconds. So great is the volume of information requests that one telecom company has advised that it has installed what it calls, and I quote, a mirror on its network so that it can send raw data traffic directly to federal authorities. Michael Geist, a digital law professor at the University of Ottawa, says this of what is happening, and I quote, "This is happening on a massive scale, and rather than the government taking a step back and asking, is this appropriate, we instead have a government going in exactly the opposite direction, in a sense doubling down on these disclosures. And it is easy to find further evidence of this doubling down, of this appetite for private information. One can't help but note that C-13, which is purportedly to be about cyberbullying, is more about lowering the bar of government access to information. The reason to believe standard is being replaced with a reason to suspect standard, opening up much greater warrantless access to electronic information. Moreover, C-13 will allow a broader and lower range of government officials access to private information of Canadians. S-4 will also be coming before this House, we suspect. That bill will permit non-governmental organizations, corporations, access to information from telecom companies. FATCA, the Foreign Account Tax Compliance Act, buried deep in the budget bill, will expose the financial information of about 1 million Canadians to the U.S. government, and so on, Mr. Speaker. In light of all of this, Mr. Speaker, one could argue that there's a kind of naivete to the motion that I speak in support of today. Certainly the first part of the motion is easy enough. It is, in fact, all that the Privacy Commissioner has requested. And she has said, I'm not disputing that there are times when there is no time to get a warrant. Life is in danger. What we would like is for those warrantless disclosures to simply be represented in statistics so that Canadians have an idea of the scope of the phenomenon. It would give a form of oversight by empowering citizens to see what the scope of the phenomenon is. A modest enough proposal, Mr. Speaker. At least let me see what it is that you're doing here, federal government. But, Mr. Speaker, we are also asking the government to close the loophole that has allowed the indiscriminate disclosure of the personal information of law-abiding Canadians without a warrant. In so doing, we must recognize that we are asking the predator to restrain itself, to bind itself, to limit its own appetite for our private information, to guard itself. It has no such impulse, Mr. Speaker, no such sense of constraint as is obvious by the 1.2 million requests, by C-13, by S-4, by FATCA. Here, Mr. Speaker, is the very saddest part of this. As we engage with each other through the technologies of this modern world, we do so with some trepidation about how exposed we are to the prying eyes and interests of others. And part of what we need to be concerned about now, we find out, is the prying eyes and interests of our own government. Rather than being able to rely on our own government to support us to protect our privacy in this modern world, it appears that our government is itself cause for our concern. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.